Hello, my friends. Welcome back to me, your host, Christian Watson. It is wonderful to be with you guys today on this Tuesday, this wonderful, wonderful Tuesday, in which the Biden administration is making another move that I find very concerning. And we'll talk about why it is concerning on a moral level and a conceptual level and even a spiritual level in a moment. But if you guys have enjoyed this content or you are a regular watcher of my content, I ask one thing of you. If you could subscribe to me on YouTube, if you haven't already, and if you could donate to my PayPal, which is officialcwatson@gmail.com. That is officialcwatson@gmail.com. Any amount helps. I'm trying to make sure I can do this full time, and for me to be able to do that, I have to be able to make more money off of this. So it's an uncomfortable truth of reality, but the more you support me, no matter what amount it is, the more I can do my work. So, speaking of my work, let's examine what is happening today. So, at 2 p.m., and I'm sure this video will be up way after Biden's made his speech, but at 2 p.m., Joe Biden will be speaking about racial equity, and he will be announcing, well, after 12:30, he'll be announcing that the content of his executive orders and how they help to further the cause of racial equity. So, when I first saw this come across my feed, I thought one thing. Well, actually, I thought about a few things. When I thought about Kamala Harris's abysmal explanation of equity versus equality. Then, I thought about the conflation between equality and equity, and the sense in which that conflation involves the terms equality and equity. What I mean by that is that what kind of equality and what kind of equity is being used as the terms are conflated. So I just began thinking about a bunch of linguistic stuff, because that's the kind of person I am. I like to think about the concepts. And my concerns were that this was going to be not a conversation about equality or equity in the sense of the fair adjudication of the law, the fair dispensation of just action. My concern was this is going to be a string of leftist buzzwords that really mean nothing when we apply the Socratic method and we apply a lot of the truth and our rationality to it. And apparently, I was correct. Joe Biden said on Twitter, in his POTUS official government account, America has never lived up to its founding promise of equality for all, but we've never stopped trying. Today, I'll take action to advance racial equity and push us closer to that more perfect union we've always strived to be. This tweet includes both a confusion and an abomination of several key principles. Number one, America has never lived up its founding promise of equality for all. Well, you have to understand, Joe Biden, America was not just founded as an experiment, although it is an experiment. America was founded as the acknowledgement of natural truths. And it is a natural truth that every human being, as they are in their nature, has equal value. Every human being has equal freedom. Every human being has equal rationality. Every human being has equal liberty. Even if those human beings happen to be impotent, or if they happen to be infirm, or they happen to go into a coma, or they happen to be disabled, it doesn't matter. They still have that inherent value bequeathed upon them by natural law, bequeathed upon them by God, or whatever source you want to attribute it to. They still have that. America was simply an acknowledgement of that truth that permeated throughout the 16th and 17th century natural law traditions, which went from Grotius to Pufendorf to John Locke and manifested in the Declaration of Independence. So Joe Biden, America was simply an acknowledgement. It wasn't always a prescription. It was an acknowledgement. So it's not that America had to live up to what the truth is, although we're trying to. It's that America was founded on the truth, and it was founded as a confirmation of the truth. So that truth always existed, even if the country, or even if people in the country, never recognized it. It always exists. Even if no one recognized that the law of gravity exists, the law of gravity still exists. And if we live up to it or not, It still exists. So that's the first problem with Joe Biden's little piece of sophistry here. He doesn't recognize that the axiomatic formation of the American experiment is what matters. Number two, he doesn't define equality. And they never define equality. Well, Christian, this is a tweet. So what? So what? He doesn't define equality, and he uses equality in an egalitarian sense. But, ladies and gentlemen, the equality that America talked about, because he talks about equality in the context of America, was the equality of freedom amongst human beings. And the law is meant to preserve that freedom and protect it from assailment. Not to give you freedom, not to give you equality, not to give you stuff. Joe Biden wants to invert the natural purpose, or the primary purpose, the proper station of the law, and then use that inversion to proceed forth in a positive understanding of the law, that positive being that law gives you things, law gives you this, law gives you that, law gives you voting rights, law gives you women's rights, law gives you this, law gives you this. It doesn't give you anything. Because if the law gives you something, it most certainly is not a right. It most certainly is a privilege. Because the law is simply an extension of a collective sum of human beings' wills. And those human beings which form the form of the government are incredibly chaotic, and they are incredibly fickle, and they can't even decide the budgets half the time. They can't even decide when to enact austerity measures and when not to enact austerity measures. And so you think that they're going to be able to give you something that is supposed to emanate and originate in your spirit? The equality Joe Biden is talking about is not simply the equality of freedom. He's talking about the equality of outcome. He's talking about the equality of circumstance. He's talking about all kind of things which, I'm sorry, cannot be provided by the government, because the government is not a god. The government is not a deity. There are certain things that happen in reality that just happen. I will never have the same opportunities that LeBron James had. Number one, I'm not as handsome. Number two, I'm not as athletic. I'm not as talented as he is. I will never have the same opportunities that John Legend has. Not that I would want to. John Legend's kind of an airhead these days. These things are just not going to come to me. And the primary problem with the egalitarian left-wing idea of equality is that it measures people not as individuals, but as permanently in relation to other people. I just had a debate with someone, and the person in the debate said, Christian, my goal here, he's a leftist, my goal here is not to look at this individually. I want us to have a collective responsibility towards the aggregate of African Americans, and I want to push the aggregate of African Americans towards the aggregate sum of white Americans. So basically, the idea is I want to make the mass of African Americans, I've reduced them to a mass, I want to make them statistically as beneficial and statistically as helped as white folks are supposedly statistically. This is the mentality that so many left-leaning people labor under. But the problem is, you cannot measure these things by aggregate or mass, because these things are ultimately the emanation, the result of individual circumstances. It's okay to generalize statistically, but I bet you there's not a single rational economist that is going to have you make policies off of a simple aggregate. They're going to look at the specifics, the particulars, and even if they didn't, the truth still remains. You have to look at specific and particular circumstances rather than aggregates if you want to get a good idea of what's going on. If you were going to make a policy to reinvest into a community, which I don't think is correct in the first place, but if you were going to, you would have to look at not just the aggregate of the community, individuals in the community, and cater to their needs if you want to make a rational policy. So, but there's also, and this is a little last thing I don't have, there's also a more pernicious idea here. It's the idea that the government can form or help form the most perfect union, the more perfect union. Not by non-intervention and perseverance. Because preservation and non-intervention, they can help maintain the idea of a perfect union. Biden says the government can form and push this idea by basically giving us racial equity. Ladies and gentlemen, it wasn't the government that started the Dockham sit-ins and that disrupted the racism that was being shown to so many African Americans in their communities. It was individuals who decided to use their pockets and use their purses without the government's help to shut down racism. It wasn't the government that got Greenwood Tulsa off its feet. It was former slaves in a former slave colony, and they harnessed the energies of capitalism to birth something beautiful. It wasn't the government, necessarily, that freed the slaves. It was concerned people like Harriet Tubman who went down and helped get slaves up from the Underground Railroad. It has never been the government has always came after the fact. The government has always came after the fact on issues of race or whatever. They always come after the fact. The American experiment, the American Union, is not top-down. The American Union is simply a reflection of our cultural undercurrents. And the more we keep pushing towards a brighter vision, the more we keep pushing towards, using social action in a positive way to preserve liberty, the more this idea of a more perfect union is formed. Biden's coercion and Biden's botched definitions of equality and Biden's botched definitions of equity would simply serve to act as a form of tyranny to make us all equal when we really aren't naturally equal and we can't really become equal. All of that stuff, that won't help us make a more perfect union. That'll simply alienate a good majority of the union, including many black folks, who have taken up the mantle of responsibility and have channeled that Booker T. Washington spirit. A little bit of Du Bois, too. A little bit of Du Bois. We can't forget Du Bois. But they've channeled that Washington spirit, and they've said, you know what? We're not going to sit here and wait for someone to save us. We're going to save ourselves. That is the message that I want to give to you. This is nothing more than a sham. A philosophically inept one at that. I look forward to seeing Biden's arguments. But if they're anything like they were in the past, I'm not at all necessarily convinced that they will give anything but pompous and morally presumptuous sense of righteousness amongst the Biden folks. The conversations and the actions that concern race in this country always start from the bottom up, not the top down. Think on it. As always, my friends, I love you, and please stay pensive. Bye-bye. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this message, please be sure to support my channel through PayPal. My PayPal is @officialcwatson, as you see on the screen. Any amount helps. Thank you so much, and stay pensive.